Thank you very much. Okay, so green is forward. Where are we at here? Okay, great. Hi, everybody. I'm going to open by telling you two little anecdotes and then one really important story that's going to be a theme throughout the talk. So the first story I want to tell you is about a recent presentation I did for the Canadian National Regulatory Authority. So there was over 700 people in Vancouver, and all the regulators across Canada came to this conference, and any regulated industry was represented there, and another 500 people online. And I was on a panel, and the person who spoke ahead of me was a family lawyer who talked about her experience with a package that she opened from a client, and it was an explosive. I don't know if you read about this, but she had over a dozen surgeries, and she lost a hand, and she told her story, and it was very powerful, and it was about reprioritizing and how to self-care and take proper rest. And when I spoke after her, I asked for a show of hands of who felt compassion for her, and all 700 people in the room put their hands up because they didn't know her, and they didn't have any prejudgment, and they didn't know anything about her. They went in with an open mind, and that is what trauma-informed care is about. It's the idea that we hold no judgment about another human being, and we're willing to hear their story and feel empathy and compassion for their experience. The second story I'm going to tell you is about emotional brilliance. And this is a story that was told in the book by Dan Goleman on emotional intelligence. And it's about an American that was living in Japan, and he was studying Aikido, and that's the Japanese art of defense fighting. So the idea is not to ever start a fight, but that you have the skills to defend yourself and protect yourself and others. And they were on a very busy subway in Japan, and there was a very drunk, very large man assaulting people. And he was frightening, and everybody was cowering and running away from him. And this American thought, well, this is the time to use what I've learned. And he was just about to start to fight him when a little voice came from the other side of the train and said, "Hey, hey." And it was a friendly voice, and it was a tiny little old Japanese man. And he said to the drunk, "Hey, come here." And the drunk said, what are you talking to me for? What the hell do I need to talk to you for? He said, "I just want to know what you've been drinking." And he said, "What's it your business?" And he was all ready to attack, and everybody was so scared. And he said, "Well, I'm drinking sake, and what's it to you? And I should attack you for even speaking to me." And he said, "Oh yeah, me and my wife love sake. We sit every night in the backyard, and we have a cup of sake. It's warm. You must have a wife." And he said, "Well, she died." And he said, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that." And he said, "Well, and I like sake too, and we used to drink sake." And he said, "Oh, and do you like, we have a persimmon tree." And he said, "Well, yeah, I like that too, but I lost everything. I lost my wife, I lost my home, I lost my job, I have nothing." And he said, "Do you want to tell me a little more about it?" And so he softened, and he sat down, and by the next stop, the Japanese man said, "Would you like to come and have some sake with my wife and I?" And he was lying down on his lap and telling him about all of his trauma. So that is emotional brilliance. That is when we can see the person behind the pain, the person behind the behavior, the feelings behind the words. And now I'm going to tell you about Jane. And you're going to hear about Jane throughout this presentation. So Jane is, Jane is a client that I've been working with for a long time. Jane is 67 years old, and she is very bright. She worked as an investment advisor. She has 2 grown children and a husband, and she collects art. And she was involved in a motor vehicle accident where she believes the driver did a U-turn and purposely hit her. She lost consciousness. She sustained a concussion and some orthopedic injuries. Her recovery was very slow. She had an excellent team, an excellent OT, an excellent speech therapist, an excellent lawyer. Yet she wasn't progressing, and she wasn't getting better. and people were feeling frustrated and stuck. And these are bright, talented professionals. Her memory was affected, her focus was affected, and the change in her cognition and her ability was extremely difficult for her to accept. When I started working with Jane, I had to build and establish trust with her to start to peel the onion and see what was going on beneath what everybody was seeing. And she was very proud, and she was very, very strong. Didn't need anybody. Didn't really know how to accept help. This is a trauma response. Trauma doesn't look like somebody saying, I had a hard time, can you help me? It looks like I'm going to tell you what's what, and I'm going to make sure that I manage every word that you write, and I edit every report, and I am in control of this whole process. And if anybody crosses me that doesn't give me a sense of control, I will destroy them. And that's what trauma can look like. It can look like people that are described as difficult, demanding, challenging clients, a pain. We hear this all the time, but there's a person behind all that anger and aggression or rigidity or firmness that we need to somehow tap into. But that is a very specialized skill set that many people aren't willing to learn because they've been doing this for so long and they know their profession so well. So to tell a professional 20 years into practice that knows what they do and they could do it in their sleep and they've had success through all those years that there might be a different way to work with these specific clients, it's a really hard thing to do. People don't always want to learn when they're later on in their career how to connect with others. So keep Jane in mind, and we're going to come back to her. So this keeps asking me to log in. Okay. So my name is Eden Dales. Nice to meet all of you. Simona, thank you for the warm introduction. And I am here to talk to you about trauma-informed care. So trauma is the lasting emotional response that often results from living through a distressing event. Experiencing trauma can harm a person's sense of safety, sense of self, and ability to regulate their emotions and navigate relationships long after the trauma occurs. And people with trauma can often feel shame, helplessness, powerlessness, and an intense fear. I recently heard a family doctor make a comment that the hostages that were babies won't remember this. And that is the opposite of trauma-informed care. Because when you are trained in trauma in the brain and trained in developmental trauma, event-based trauma, trauma related to chronic or acute stress, trauma's impact on the brain and development, the age at which the brain is the most malleable and forming, you realize that the brain and the body remember everything. And it's not to say that somebody who has attachment trauma or developmental trauma can't heal, but it certainly dismisses all of the science that has taught us that the brain remembers and the brain develops with those experiences. And so I made this presentation less scientific and more relatable, but there is a lot of evidence and studies and neuroscience that explains really beautifully how trauma results in the brain. So when I heard that, I thought, aren't family doctors required to train in trauma-informed care? Because that is a statement from somebody who actually believes that a trauma at the infancy age wouldn't have an impact on life. Trauma-informed care is believing that anybody may have experienced trauma. And trauma-informed care is about not having to ask about somebody's trauma, but seeing past their challenging behaviors to understand what may have happened to them and building trust and rapport with them where they feel safe to help you understand what they've been through. So I just mentioned the types of trauma. So the acute traumatic event, like a car accident, complex trauma or chronic stress, and developmental trauma. And trauma-informed care was developed from the ACEs study, the Adverse Childhood Events Study. It's a scale of 10 questions, and these are questions that are designed to elicit a response about the way you were treated as a child, if you were hurt physically, if you were called names, if you were cared for or not cared for, if you suffered a divorce or lost a parent at an early age. These adverse childhood events have been proven, the biggest study ever done, publicly funded in the U.S. At Kaiser Permanente was the ACEs study, and the result is that if you have 3 or 4 or more ACEs, your risk of health problems in the future are increased. So there's a wonderful video about the ACEs study called, what is it called? Sorry. I'm going to send it to you. Sorry, Stand in the Circle. That's what it's called. It's excellent. So ACEs are common. 64% of U.S. adults reported they experienced at least one type of ACE before they were 18, and nearly 1 in 6 reported they experienced 4 or more types of ACEs. So these are babies that are born into the world and maybe not cared for appropriately, maybe not treated with kindness and warmth, and so the pattern continues and the cycle repeats. And if you ever find yourself wondering why people continuously choose partners that are harmful to them, it's because our brain craves familiarity. We might know cognitively that there's a better way to be treated, but our brain will always do what's most familiar. So understanding why people do what they do is being trauma-informed and not holding judgment about anyone's behaviors or anyone's decisions. So trauma-informed care is a shift from what's wrong with you, why are you so demanding, to what might have happened to you. And when you shift your perspective and you reframe your lens, you're able to look at the client's complete picture, their whole life situation, past and present, because what happened to them matters. And that's why there's a lot of challenges in medical legal work with the thin skull, crushed skull, vulnerability piece, because that matters a whole lot. If you have previous trauma and then you have new trauma, your old trauma doesn't go away. It's compounded by the new pain. And there is a method to help people rebuild their sense of self, to treat them with kindness and warmth. This is not about being nice. This is not a nice to have. This is a very scientifically based method that matters and that makes the difference in somebody's outcome. So it's a universal precaution. I train a lot of regulators, I train a lot of prosecutors, and it doesn't change their work. It doesn't change the decisions they make. But the way that they approach others can make the difference in somebody feeling disappointed that the outcome was not in their favor, but was able to cope with the outcome, versus somebody who was re-traumatized in the way they were approached when the end result happened. And the risk of suicidality in people in litigation is very high, and this can be the difference. So it protects professionals from being held accountable for somebody else's trauma, because like I said, trauma can look like I'm going to destroy you, and that means going to your college. And so it's protective for us, and it's protective for them, to help them heal, to help them not feel re-traumatized, and to help them feel hope. And hope is holding the belief that whatever comes your way, you'll find a way to handle it. Hopelessness is I can't handle anything that comes my way. We want to foster hope. And that means the better we help them, support them, the better our outcomes are. So if you're working for years with a client and you're working on their legal case and you're investing time and effort and energy, you want to make sure that you don't have any surprises. You want to make sure you don't go to mediation 2 years down the road and find out something because the client's distressed and they unload something and you didn't even know about it. I mean, that is what I understand is the most devastating thing for a case, because it discredits a lot of the work you've done. Building this trust and having people that are trauma-informed involved will help protect that, because you are able to get the real story of what happened. So it's universal precaution, helps in outcomes. It certainly reduces costs and helps improve wellness in the client. So trauma shapes and informs our interactions with others, and it has a profound impact on our body, mind, and spirit. Healing from trauma is possible. And oftentimes, like I said, it's not about asking about someone's trauma. It's about retraining the individual and experiencing healthy interactions and healthy warmth and healthy respect. So if somebody's never received that, they're not going to be familiar with it, and they're going to reject it, and they're going to make sure that they take over and they redirect the conversation and the interaction to be what they're used to, which is harsh and aggressive in that specific set of circumstances. It could be somebody who has a very strong pleasing nature. I mean, there's lots of, I could talk about this for weeks. This is like a 30-minute talk, so I'm giving you as much as I can in keeping with that. So thinking about all of the ways trauma impacts individuals will help a trauma-informed professional or individual, because any behavior, any symptom, any statement, it's all related to the brain that has experienced trauma. So trauma-informed care is incorporating trauma awareness into all aspects of service delivery, prioritizing physical and emotional safety, fostering trust and collaboration between clients and service providers, and empowering individuals to make choices about their care and treatment. So back to Jane. When I met Jane in my office, I was able to take my time to observe her and get to know what worked well with Jane. So I got to know that Jane needed to have a sense of control. She needed to have full transparency about why I was doing what I was doing, who was going to hear what I was doing, what I was going to write. So letting her be a part of my clinical notes helped tremendously. Letting her review the report that I prepared and tell me about inaccuracies and tell me about things that didn't feel right to her gave me an opportunity to educate her on why I felt it was important. But again, this, other than mandatory reporting, engaging with the client and educating them on why we do what we do is tremendously effective. So Jane wanted the report to reflect her hard work. When she was told that she had a thin skull, the thin skull principle, oh, did she get defensive. She wanted everybody on the team to know how bloody hard she had worked at her recovery. And she stated her IQ to anyone who would listen. And she needed everybody to back down and stop telling her that she had vulnerability. When I got to know Jane, I learned that she was orphaned as a baby. She was adopted at 4 months. So for the first 4 months, she didn't have a primary caregiver. She was adopted by a wealthy couple who did not have any experience with children, young siblings, other children. So, and she describes them as white glove people. So her experiences include being left at a hospital for 11 days at the age of 9 when she broke her leg while her parents were on vacation. She described having sexual trauma at the age of 14 when she was alone and coming home and taking a bath and having her mom say, "We don't get upset about things like this. It happens all the time. I don't know why you're crying." She was never approached with warmth. She was never nurtured. She was taught at a young age not to have needs, not to feel sadness, nobody comes. Why cry? It doesn't work. Nobody cares. Then they adopted a younger boy, and he is a paranoid schizophrenic, so the little attention her parents ever had for her was long lost onto him. I think she was blamed for that as well. And so she used her very high IQ and left the family town and did great. She found a partner who was considerate and supportive. He had his own history of lacked nurturing, but very bright. And they got married, and they have a beautiful home, and they have 2 children that are extremely successful. So on face value, wow, is she strong, right? On face value, anyone who looks at her, think, you are so resilient. But then she had this accident. And when I hear somebody believe that the person intended to hurt them and had killer eyes, that's a red flag for me, because that level of paranoia is not something that we don't have any evidence for that. Jane's description on our first meeting of her IQ, and described herself as having very high self-esteem, and described herself as never having needed any help from anybody. To me, major red flag. I see right through that, and I see, okay, has anyone ever been warm to you? Have you ever been warm to yourself? So my work with Jane had to be very careful and very slow. And I had to let her feel that she was in control. So she learned to trust me, that I would let her tear the report to shreds. I can handle it. I would let her tell me all the things she wanted me to know about how the lawyer got it so wrong by suggesting she had a thin skull, and not use knowledge to counteract her anger. If I had said to her, no, this is what it means, which makes sense, that's a normal response, wouldn't have worked for Jane. It would have made her feel small. It would have made her feel wrong. It would have made her feel vulnerable. Making Jane feel vulnerable is the worst thing I could have done, because she had no skills to tolerate being wrong about something. She had no awareness of what it was like to need help. She didn't know how to accept help. So we worked together for years, and a lot of my work with her was just modeling warmth and understanding and meeting her emotional needs and validating her experience and helping her to understand no human being on this planet doesn't need support, doesn't need other people. So the beginning of working with her was her grandchildren would come over, and she would get very angry if anything had fingerprints on it, if anything was messed up, if there were shoes in the house, those things would make her like feel crazy. And now, but 3-4 years later, she's so brilliant and so successful that she has welcomed the mess. She has a relationship with her husband. She has a relationship with her children. She's actually gone to find her birth family. They are wonderful. There's so much there, but just thinking about that rigidity and how easily we say, oh, she's so difficult, she's so demanding. And when I tried to help the other professionals understand that there's a way to work with Jane that is going to be effective, it's not sympathy. She does not want your sympathy. She does not want you to be tiptoeing around her. She does not want you to prove her wrong. She wants you to have the courage to be honest and transparent and allow her to have a part in her recovery. She needs that control. And for us to be able to adapt and do therapy, like provide therapy, provide treatment that matches somebody's unique needs, that is emotional brilliance. That is the highest level of empathy and evolvement, because there is not one size fits all. Anybody who's trauma informed would never say one therapy doesn't work, because they don't know the person. So the physical space had to be safe for Jane. There had to be enough space between us so she didn't feel like I was encroaching on her space. I always have water for people. I always have Kleenex. I always have air. These things matter. They reduce the tension in the environment. I always check in. Is it okay if I ask about this? You know, how's this going for you? Is there somebody you want to call? When clients are in distress, there's a whole method to how you approach them, right? If you go to trial and you have a client that's in distress and you take a break and you go on your phone and you take a break from them and you go back into that courtroom, nothing will change. You'll have the exact same client. But if you use the method of regulate, relate, reason, which is a whole other talk, then you will be able to align with your client. So these are the things that I strongly recommend learning about. So trauma-informed care, the key principles are physical, emotional safety for individuals. Physical, psychological, and emotional safety, it should say. The psychological safety is you tell me how you're going to feel most comfortable. What would help you? Because I don't have an agenda, because I don't know you, and I have no judgment about you. Trustworthiness and transparency. You're going to be exposed to everything that leaves this office because it's your life and it's your story. And when I referred her to one clinic who submitted a treatment plan or prepared a treatment plan and sent it to her, and she saw that it said she was unemployed when really she was retired, that matters to her. It matters a lot. So when I said to the clinic, please contact her, have a discussion with her, and draft it with her because she's very bright and she wants to be involved, and that didn't happen, that came back to me. I trusted you, and they got me wrong. I said, you're right. You're absolutely right. And we can't control every outcome, but when a professional gives you that information, use it. Empowerment, voice, and choice. Empowered Jane to use her voice and to name her emotions. Did this go to that? No. Oh my God. I am so sorry. I am so sorry. Oh my goodness. Okay. We're getting there. I've done all these, but you're going to get them all. Empowerment, voice, and choice. So I'm helping Jane to understand. She never knew how to name her emotions. She shut them down so young because nobody ever came. So why need anybody? So the only emotion she ever knew was anger. That's it. Anger. Anger's not even a core emotion. It's the result of all the other emotions. Embarrassment, shame, sadness, hopelessness, fear. There's just so much going on that she was not even, she was so detached from her emotional experience, but that was required for her to connect to the people around her. To even say the words, I'm sad, I'm upset, I don't know the answer. These were so foreign to her. She knew everything. So I had to help validate that she knew everything and then see what else she knew instead of fixing her. So that's a reframe. That's a trauma-informed reframe. Peer support. She came to me and told me initially that her marriage was terrible. She didn't have a relationship with her daughter, and her son was very successful, and she wanted me to know his income. And now, 3 or 4 years later, I can't remember, 3 or 4 years, she has a very deep relationship with her husband, and she is able to ask him for help. And she learned the basic tools of, how to ask for help and how to, she came to me and said, I don't have empathy. I've never felt empathy. And I think there's something wrong with me. And I said, there's absolutely nothing wrong with you. And you have a fantastic sense of empathy. You just haven't found it in a while. And we found it. And now she is so in tune with other people's emotions. I mean, we have just, watching her grow and flourish has just been incredible. So collaboration and mutuality, working with the team members, not only refer and let go, but actually working with them to say, listen, I want to refer this to you, but you got to listen to me. This is how it works with her. This is what I need to deliver on. So can you do that? And having accountability for that collaboration. And then culture, gender, and historical issues. I needed to learn Jane's language. I needed to learn how she was treated as a child. I needed to learn how conflict was resolved. I needed to learn how emotional needs were met. I needed to understand all of this because all of this sets up for how, as adults, we respond to distress and we handle conflict and we handle negotiation and collaboration and recovery and growth and all these things that we do. We need to understand their culture. You know, how did you grow up? And it opens up so much. So as a lawyer working with individuals who have been victimized, finding a way to properly assess gently and carefully to get the information you need that's going to make your job a lot easier, that whole skill set matters so much. Oh, okay. So the 4 R's of trauma-informed care. So realize the widespread impact of trauma on the lives of our clients. Respond to individuals with empathy and compassion. That's not being nice. That's not being sweet. That's actually trying to feel a feeling or remember a time you felt something that is similar to the feeling they are having. So if your client is scared, remember feeling scared. No human being is above or below another human being. No human being is immune to human emotion. Anybody who is not overly sensitive, not overly emotional, they just need a little help to remember a time they felt this. Because feeling our feelings, naming our feelings, and being able to communicate that is trauma-informed. Recognizing the signs of trauma in individuals, even when they may not disclose their experiences. So assuming anyone could have had trauma, and you'll get to it at the right time, but treating them all with this approach. And resisting re-traumatization. So I could have re-traumatized Jane 100 times over if I had said, you know, this is how reports have to be prepared. This is just the way it goes. This is what they recommend. I could have said to her that, you know, you do have a thin skull. This is what the lawyer meant, and I'm going to explain it to you. I could have educated her. All of that would have re-traumatized her because none of that was what she needed. She needed to redirect the focus to feeling a sense of control when she really never had any. Okay. So the 3 E's of trauma-informed care. So there's the event. The event is factual. The event is what happened. So the event can be the same for everyone involved. The experience of the event is different for everyone. So if I have a history, let's go back to Jane. So Jane's history of trauma, which she rose above and functioned so beautifully for so long until she had this event, came to haunt her because her belief that she was under attack, her anger at all of these people that were telling her about her thin skull and about her need for support, that didn't match her worldview. Her worldview was, I don't need anybody. I never have and I never will. I managed it alone at 11. I did it alone at 7. I did it alone at 14. I'm 67. I don't need anybody. So their worldview is based on how their brain formed as a child. And so how we experience the event is based on so many different factors, right? Our culture, our history, our family, our values, our education, our knowledge. I mean, there's everything that goes into our thinking shapes how we experience the event. And then there's the effect, which is a direct result of the experience. So if I experience an event based on all of that trauma and a negative worldview and untrusting and nobody ever comes, so why need anybody? And then the effect is going to be devastating for me. So when people have a trauma and we have an assumption on how long it should take for them to heal or that they're not getting better fast enough, we have no idea how they experience that trauma and the effect it has on their daily life. The only thing we know is the event. Oh. Okay, so implementation and social work. Am I done? I'm okay for a few more minutes? Okay. So implementation and social work. So we've worked extremely hard on crafting social work assessment templates that reflect how somebody was, became who they are. Because understanding how people become who they are is so important when you look at how they recover from an event. So understanding the things like how they resolved conflict in their past, how they dealt with problems, how they problem solved, how they asked for help, how their emotional needs were met. And writing about these pieces helps everybody involved in the case understand who this person is, because you can't just look at an event in isolation and not consider that this is somebody who has a long history of never having support. And so that's why they keep rejecting providers, not because they're not engaged, not because they're not motivated. All these assumptions are made, but there's a reason. There's a reason why everybody does everything. We have to understand who this person is. So screen and assess for trauma and anticipate what might be challenging. So prepare ahead of time, prepare for trial, transparency, all the information you can give. Let them know the schedule of the day. When will breaks be offered? You know, when can you ask for a break? Who do you want to be with you there? Who will support you? How can I make this as smooth as possible for you? There will be surprises, but I'm going to tell you everything I know. And if you look at me, I'm going to bring you back to the present. And, you know, having them bring a cheat sheet with them to trial of the things that help them calm down, the people that help them, the things that they want to remember so they can manage. That all is trauma informed. Modify treatment approaches and accommodate those who experience trauma. Provide trauma specific interventions and referrals, and educate the team members on this strengths-based approach. I did try and educate the law clerk for Jane on how she might have a better outcome with Jane. And it was met with, I've been doing this for many years. I worked with many difficult clients. I'm good. And I was not in any way trying to suggest that there was anything wrong with her approach. I just learned that there was a way to connect with Jane that was effective. So resistance to learning new ways is a big barrier for our community. Educating on calming and grounding strategies, like we said, effective break taking. So challenges and barriers, like I said, when people are resistant to learn later on in their career and resistant to feedback, and when there's something called countertransference and transference, and when you take on the emotions of another individual and they become your defenses come up because you feel challenged by a defensive client, and then you are having your own experience and that becomes very messy and poor boundaries. Learning how to check yourself, regulate your own emotions, reflect on your behavior and your impact on others, and approach clients who are in distress when you are in a moderate, regulated state, so you're protected from their emotions, really allows you to provide the kind of support that they need. And so that role definition is really important. So there is a lack of training and awareness. This isn't required, unfortunately. So we still see people all the time that don't want to learn about trauma-informed care, or they call themselves the trauma-informed lawyer or I'm trauma-informed. And if you look at the CDC, they have requirements for calling yourself trauma-informed. You do have to have the proper training. So if you haven't trained in this, just because you work with people with trauma, unfortunately, doesn't have the layers of self-awareness and emotional intelligence and understanding the red flags and the defenses and the responses. I mean, there's just so much here, but it is so hopeful because this model does work. So resource limitations, of course, but this model is designed for en masse. This model is designed to teach everyone and anyone. So the school crossing guard, the secretary, the person who comes and collects the garbage, the IT person, everybody from the top professional, everyone in the organization is trained in this. So everybody has a possibility to have a positive effect on somebody or potentially re-traumatize them by the way that they're behaving. And that's why I love this model, because it's cost effective and it reduces costs as well. I think I'm done, right? So We talked about cultural considerations and so key takeaways. So trauma can have a profound impact on individuals' lives and well-being, and it comes in various forms. Trauma-informed care is an approach to client-centered care, which is what's best for the client, not the professional, and responds to the effects of trauma. Safety, trustworthiness, empowerment, and recognition are key principles of trauma-informed care. Trauma-informed care is proven to improve client outcomes and enhance well-being among staff and clients and others. And Jane is doing great, and she consented to me using pieces of her story in this presentation today. Her name isn't Jane, but I hope you found this helpful. And again, this was just a brief overview of a very, very complex and lengthy topic, but I encourage you to educate yourselves, and you can reach out to me if you would like the public resource drive that I have with a lot of resources. Thank you. Questions? Yes. For survivors, for everybody who is involved in their case on both sides from beginning to end, to have this training, because they would be repeating the same messages and they would be demonstrating that unconditional warmth and support that the client may not be giving themselves after trauma. So I think if you can't ensure everybody's trained, then doing your best to train as much as you can in this area. Read. I love to read. I mean, there's so many good resources out there. And you can search the specific question you have, and it will give you a trauma-informed response. I don't know if that helps. Policies and procedures have to change. Like when you look at organizational change, an organization is a living organism, and it has to adapt over time and change. And when there are parts of the organism that are not trauma-informed, the entire system cannot function from this approach. So you're always going to have cancerous cells in the organism that are blocking the treatment. So that's a whole other training, but looking up, there are templates for trauma-informed policies and procedures, and they need to be reviewed every year. And if they're not trauma-informed and they don't reflect what's happened over the last year, what evidence, where science has gone, what's happened with clients, feedback you've gotten, problems you've had, if they don't reflect and change based on that, then that's a stuck system. So policies and procedures, that's where the change happens, and then it filters down through the organization. And I have a template of that in my training, and I teach how to adapt your policy. And I mean, there's things in there like what happens when there's a suicide in the organization, either in a client or a staff. And I still see people that are calling themselves trauma-informed organizations, and nobody was called. And there's 25 people on the file on both sides. There was a suicide, and I said, so who's checked on you? Nobody. So that has to be a policy. When there's a crisis, what happens? How are things handled?
I think just building on that question, when we're talking about the justice system, for example, I mean, part of especially a defense lawyer's role is to be tough and aggressive and to save your client money or to get your, get the perpetrator convicted, all of those sorts of things. So when you've got entire organizations, insurance companies, for example, who their whole focus is not trauma informed because they want you to save them money. So how do you deal with that kind of systemic problem?
So, I mean, I deal with insurance companies every day. And I am finding that as you move up the chain to the supervisor level, there is a lot more empathy and compassion demonstrated. So I do think that there's some training happening. It seems different than it was. But all we can do is help empower the client to understand that you might come across somebody who doesn't have this knowledge. And so when you help them understand what re-traumatization looks like, and you help them create boundaries where this is where you end and they begin. So if their words or behavior hurt you or upset you, they might not have the knowledge, right? Like I was able to educate Jane that the lawyer was actually trying to help her. He didn't have the awareness of what that would do for Jane, because every other client that he's told, it's been effective because it said, look, we're going to show them that you have a history of vulnerability. But in this situation, I was able, over time, when trust was established, help her understand that we have to hold compassion and empathy for people where they're at. People do the best they can with what they've got. So just like we don't want anyone judging you, we can't judge this adjuster and assume that they know, or judge this lawyer because they might not have this awareness. So we teach people how to respond. Does that make sense? So we can't change their system, but we can certainly change the way it's perceived and understood as depersonalizing it. Like this is their policy. This is not about Jane. But people who are vulnerable take everything personally, believe everything is about them, and we have to help them create that barrier that we can handle that. Yeah, we know what's coming, and you prepare them, and we tolerate it, and you build up that trust with yourself.
Thanks. So in terms of dealing with clients who have traumatized, I guess it was implied that you should focus also on the strengths of the client. You didn't talk about that much because I assume that if they're defensive about certain stuff and they have their reasons for being defensive, if you counterbalance that with, well, you've got these strengths and thereby sort of building up that person's self-esteem and your relationship with them, is that an approach you'd use as well?
Absolutely. I love a strengths-based approach. You amplify their strengths. So when they do something that's different than they've done before, like when I see Jane and she was able to tell me that she was able to notice her distress, remove herself, calm down, come back to her partner and say, I got myself all stressed out this morning. I am sorry for behaving that way. Would you like to, do the gardening together? That's something that Jane never had the skill to do. It seems simple, but for her, it was foreign. She would get angry and put him down and criticize him and move on with her day. And it was destructive, and she was facing losing everything, including her marriage. So by amplifying those strengths, like how did you do that? Like how did you all by yourself do something different than you've ever done? How did you know to remove yourself? How did you know that it was okay to be flawed? Like, how did you overcome that perfectionistic tendency that you don't screw up? That's amazing. So you amplify their strengths with the data and you help them realize that they do have inner strengths, but the strengths isn't what she thought it was, which was look how smart I am and look how capable I am. The strength is look how human I am. So yes, I love strengths-based approach, and anyone who tells you a story about a therapist that identifies the things they're doing wrong, it's not using a strengths-based approach. My job is never tell anybody what they're doing wrong. Just find what they're doing right and amplify it. Okay. Thank you. Sorry about the slides.